our viewers. Welcome to the fifth academic session. I will be the moderator of the session. I am Professor Serhat Arman. I serve as Dean of the Faculty of Tourism at Mardin Artuklu University. Here, in fifth academic session, we will have 4 papers dealing with the COVID and gastronomy tourism. And now I will pass the floor to the Daniel Olsen for his presentation. Here you are, sir.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon, Professor. We can hear you clearly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And good morning from where I am at 6 o'clock in the morning, but it is a real pleasure to be here with you today. I'm grateful for this chance to speak to you about what I think is an example of best practice when it comes to the lessons that we can learn from the use of information communication and virtual technologies to reach the religious faithful. As has been discussed in several of the papers at this conference, the COVID-19 pandemic affected the mobilities of most of the world's population. Academics have published several papers and chapters investigating how COVID-19 affected religious communities and pilgrims who are rendered practically immobile in the name of public safety and flattening the curve. There were 2 main ways in which religious organizations and pilgrims adapted to this lack of mobility. The first was to engage in small-scale symbolic pilgrimages, where a small group of pilgrims would serve as proxy and participate in a pilgrimage to a sacred destination on behalf of a pilgrim community. The second way was through a combination of small and large-scale virtual pilgrimages. The COVID-19 pandemic provided the right impetus for religious organizations to utilize available technologies to create a diverse range of virtual experiences related to pilgrimage and sacred sites. Indeed, leaders and site managers turned rather quickly to techno-religious practices or technologies of enlightenment to reach out to the faithful. Examples included holding worship services and small discussion groups online, broadcasting sermons and local, regional, and international religious conferences via the internet, and offering confessions via Skype or Zoom. Other leaders, managers, and in some cases, enterprising entrepreneurs turned to virtual and augmented reality to facilitate remote visitation and allow pilgrims and tourists to watch or engage in rituals at home. For this presentation, I wish to discuss lessons learned by leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as they move to virtual pilgrimage at several of their religious heritage sites, which are located throughout the United States. While the church does not have a formal theology of pilgrimage, every year, thousands of people travel and visit to different sites related to the religious heritage of the faith. Each site, however, represents a different time period in church history, and as such present different religious historical material and contexts to different audiences. At the same time, because of the global nature of the faith, church leaders want to develop interpretive programs at these sites that create a uniform experience for visitors. As such, there was a tension between interpretive standardization and local adaptation at these sites. Also at stake was how church leaders could fulfill the church's missions related to pastoral care and religious outreach, even though the religious heritage sites during a time when visitation was not possible. Based on interviews with people in the church's historical sites division and using as secondary resources, I wish to briefly address how church leaders worked through this tension during the COVID-19 pandemic and again, the lessons that they learned. After giving a brief primer on the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I then look at how the church approached the use of virtual technology to help interpret their religious heritage sites. I then discuss 3 lessons that church leaders learned. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is an international Christian faith of approximately 16 million members that was founded in the United States of America in the early 19th century. Joseph Smith Jr., the faith's founder, received a series of theophanies and revelations that led him to establish a church that he considered to be the restoration of Christ's primitive church. Several religious innovations by Smith drew the ire of biblical Christians, and the church was severely persecuted. The church membership moved from place to place, starting in New York in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And they continued to move from place to place, building temples and establishing communities as they searched for a location where they could practice their faith in peace. With the death of Joseph Smith in 1844, the church moved again to the Salt Lake Valley, which is now in the modern state of Utah, which today serves as the church's global headquarters. Early in the 20th century, church leaders and members began to travel back east to many of their historical locations, those that were an integral part of church history. Over time, several historic properties were purchased, rebuilt, and maintained at great cost because of the scriptural injunction to both remember and witness regarding God's hand in the reestablishment of Christ's church in the last days. As such, the initial rationale to maintain these religious heritage sites had nothing to do with tourism or pilgrimage travel. However, thousands of church members, as well as people not of the faith, began to visit these religious sites for curiosity, educational, and religious reasons, leading church leaders to send missionaries to interpret these sites to visitors in the context of pastoral care and religious outreach. With the incredible global growth of the church over the past few decades, church leaders have had to adjust from being an American-based faith to a global faith. Inherent in this shift has been a reevaluation of its religious heritage sites. Because, with one exception, the church's religious heritage sites are in the United States, very few, approximately 1%, of its 16 million members have the capacity to visit these sites. A few years ago, the question arose regarding how to make these religious sites more accessible to the global church membership. Church leaders and members from the church's Historic Sites Division decided to experiment with different forms of virtual technologies that were increasingly being used to make location-based museum contents more accessible to global publics. Focus groups were held in English and Spanish with members of the church in Utah and Mexico City to test various technologies and types of interpretive tours. As such, while many church religious leaders were scrambling to figure out how to use technology to reach out to their faithful during the pandemic, the church had already started to think through many of these issues. However, when the pandemic hit, the church was not ready to roll out their virtual technologies. Yet guidance regarding the use of virtual technologies was vital to help site leaders and missionaries fulfill their mandate to lead guided tours. It was decided that while the church would give some standardized guidelines regarding the development of virtual tours, site missionaries and leaders would be allowed to experiment and adapt these guidelines to local conditions. Many missionaries began offering live tours to their friends and family through their missionary Facebook accounts. These virtual tours, or personalized interactive real-time tours, as outlined by Dr. David Fennell in his keynote talk yesterday, consisted of missionaries taking viewers on a virtual walking tour of the site, building the same buildings and using the same scripts they would use for in-person visitors. While there was no formal marketing of these virtual tours, word of the tours got out, and soon, according to one news source, these virtual tours spread like wildfire throughout the world. So many families and church congregations wanted to participate in a live tour that many of the historical sites had to invest in scheduling software to keep up with the demand. In addition to giving live tours to small, more intimate groups, some missionaries would offer live broadcasts where anyone around the world could watch. However, this meant that there was less interaction with viewers than which would occur with the smaller virtual tours. While these live virtual tours were popular, they were not the most effective way to reach a global audience because of time zone differences and language issues. Therefore, the church created and posted recorded tours in multiple languages to be viewed on an on-demand basis. Both the live and recorded tours have been viewed by church members from every continent around the world. Church leaders have learned several things from their experience using virtual technologies at their religious heritage sites. I will mention three here. First, virtual tours can mimic in many ways, although not fully, the effect or the emotional experiences that a person has when they are on site. The church did surveys and interviews with people who participated in both the live and virtual recorded tours. They found that many of the visitors had powerful spiritual experiences. In some cases, these experiences came because church members who might not otherwise visit these religious heritage sites in person got to experience what it would be like if they had been there in person. As the operation managers of historic sites for the church noted, the Spirit can transcend technology and space and time to testify to someone who's sitting in the Philippines watching the missionaries give a tour just as powerfully as it can to someone who's standing at a church religious heritage site. This finding matches research by Serafin and Jarud, who found that most people who attended the Lord's United Virtual Pilgrimage on the 16th of July in 2020 were quite satisfied with their virtual online pilgrimage experience. Secondly, internet connectivity and bandwidth is very important. Some of the church's religious heritage sites are in rather remote locations in the United States, so church leaders had to work with cellular providers to boost their signals. Also, cellular companies throttle or limit internet bandwidth after a certain amount of internet data is used. This throttling began to severely impact the quality of lives and pre-recorded tours and the streaming of them. Therefore, the church took advantage of what's called corporate pool accounts, paying extra money to ensure that this throttling would not occur. They also made sure that the site leaders had the appropriate technology to utilize these broadcast bands. Third, these virtual tours greatly increased the interconnectivity of church members to sacred spaces. Statistics showed that there were more people who virtually visited church historic sites in 2020 than the number of people who visited the church's religious heritage sites in person the year previous. As the operations manager of the historic sites division said, when you think about what we were planning for 2020 to be like and what it has turned out to be, in a real sense, we had a much more successful year this year in getting the story of these sacred places to the world. In fact, religious leaders were so pleased with the number of people who took virtual tours that not only will they be spending more resources and time catering to offsite visitors, but are also working on how to hybridize the on-site and off-site experience. By catering to its global membership, church leaders are in essence trying to create a second communitas, where the spirit of community is not just generated at sacred sites, but through shared virtual experiences at a global scale. And cognizant of time for my other peers to present, I will end there.
Dear Daniel, thank you very much for your presentation. In your presentation, Dr. Daniel talked about COVID-19 and effect of COVID-19 to the virtual tours, or to the tourism. And as we know, the sense of being there, important component of the travel, especially the pilgrimage travel. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we face as tourism academics and travel practitioners, we face a new phenomenon, being sense of being there, but in a virtual way. So it's another phenomenon. We have to look more deeply to understand. As at the end of his presentation, Dr. Olson claimed, virtual experience. There is more research to be done on virtual experience. I would like to ask our participants is there any question about Daniel Olson's presentation? If there is no question, I will pass the stage to our other participants, Zeynep Bakkaloğlu, with his paper, High Pressure Processing on Commerce Production. Here you are, Bakkaloğlu.
Yeah, I am here.
Yes. We see you, and I give floor to you and co-host position to you.
Thanks so much, and I will start my presentation. And I'm sharing my screen. Yes. Hi everyone. Today I will talk about high pressure processing on humus production. And according to Turkish Food Codex fermented milk notification, humus is an example of a light alcoholic fermented milk drink, also called humus, eric, or chigi, made from milk of mares and consumed in Central Asia. Humus is gray light and naturally carbonated and has alcoholic, sharp, acidic taste. The fermentation process and the product obtained are similar to kefir, but unlike solid kefir grains, and they are produced from liquid starter culture. And humus accepted as a probiotic which contains bacteria and yeast with natural metabolites of these microorganisms. Yeast simulate the proliferation lactic acid bacteria due to the metabolized portion of lactic acid. And the recent years, humus consumption is rapidly increasing, has gained a special importance to each step, production to consumption. Therefore, until humus is consumed by the consumer, is in order to quality protection elements of the introduction of new technologies is inevitable. And the aim of our study that is growing consumption of dairy product with a short shelf life in order to extend the humus. Additive are used. Some additives are used in humus production, and sorbic acid, sorbat, and the another types additives. The use of new technologies is we prevent the using additives, and in our study through the application of high pressure processing, we aim to minimize the use of additives, sensory improves quality, enhance the stability of the product, and improve the shelf life of the production too is intended. And the nature of milk, we only some problem. We have some problems about the milk stability of and shelf life. Therefore, we have some poor quality of raw materials in operation of lack of hygiene, contamination of starter cultures, and so we extend the shelf life. We use Hpp processing, and Hpp high pressure processing is promising non-thermal technique for food preservation that it's efficiently inactivates the vegetative microorganisms, most commonly related to foodborne diseases. It have some major advantages of for food. These are elimination or significant reduction of heating, thus avoiding the thermal degradation of food components, high retention of flavor, color, and nutritional value, uniform and instant treatment of the food of the product under pressure, reduce the requirement for chemical additives, and potential for the design of the new products due to the creation of new textures, tastes, and functional properties. In this study, high pressure processing can be used humus processing to increase the quality characteristic of humus. And we use some materials and methods. We use as starter cultures are lactobacilli, lactose fermenting yeasts, and non-lactose fermenting yeast. And we use 3 different processes. These are the process involved, the pressure has increased 350 megapascal to 800 megapascal, and some time periods like 15 and 5 and 1 minutes. After the process, all samples are stored until the analysis were carried out. And the production chain of hummus, it's the traditional and commercial hummus production. In traditional hummus production, we use fat standardization, homogenization, pasteurization. After the pasteurization, we cooling the milk incubation temperature and add starter cultures. Then we use incubation time, and after the incubation, we mix and packaging hummus, and we store it at cooling temperature. And commercial hummus production, we use a high pressure processing, and we only use fat standardization. And after that, we use a high pressure processing sometimes and under pressure on milk. And after the HPP, we use starter cultures, we add in milk, and we waiting for incubation 2 or 4 hours at 25 Celsius degrees. And after the incubation, we mix and cooling the milk or hummus, and we package and storage hummus in commercial hummus production. And we obtain the hummus from high pressure processing. We use some analyzes hummus. These are chemical, microbial, and statistical analyses. For chemical analysis, we determine the protein content, titration, acidity measurement, determination of fat content, and dry matter content, and pH measurement. For microbial analysis, we isolation from hummus, lactobacilli, enterococci, enterobacteriaceae, and some pathogens like coliform bacterial, fecal coliforms, and Escherichia coli isolation. And finally, we yeast and mold isolation will use. And the importance of the analysis, we use statistical analysis. And we expected the findings of this study can be explained as HP high pressure induced modification in milk proteins can be modulated by the appropriate selection of the treatment conditions like pressure intensity, temperature, and length of the treatment. Change of the milk pH, previous heat treatment, and milk concentration or fortification. However, and despite these possibilities, the application of high pressure treatments to milk and milk products like hummus to create the unique structural changes that improve the certain functions has not been commercially exploited. And undoubtedly progress, this technology will parallel developments in the availability of kinetic data on the activity of enzymes and bacteria related to hummus quality. In addition, basic knowledge on the impact of HPP treatments is still lacking in important areas such as nutrition properties of hummus. This information will contribute to design, evolution, and optimization of the process that together with the development in high pressure process equipment for industrial operations will reduce the safety concerns as well as the cost of processing. Poor manufacturing practices often results in some sensory defects in hummus. These defects may be divided into the following 3 groups: defects of aroma and flavor, defects resulting in the change of appearance, and defects of body and texture. In addition to depending on the changing conditions of life through the consumer request, a higher quality and confidence product will be obtained with high pressure processing. In parallel with development in industry of their product will be produced hummus with the application of high pressure processing. And finally, thank you for your participation and contribution, all of us. Is there any question or another?
Thank you, Dr. Bakkaloğlu. Thank you for your presentation. As tourism academics, we know that food and beverage, especially local food and beverage, important part of travel to testing them is important part of travel. In her presentation, Dr. Bakkaloğlu presented us high pressure processing method for hummus. Thank you very much for your support to our Congress. But Dr. Bakkaloğlu, as a chair of the panel, I would like to ask you, it will be better to make a connection of hummus with the gastronomy part of the tourism. How hummus is a unique product, especially unique product to the Turkish world, to the Central Asia. So there should be some connections, some explanations should be added. And I ask to other participants if is there any question to Dr. Bakkaloğlu. Thank you very much, dear Bakkaloğlu. And in our session, we have another paper. It belongs to Betül Kodaş. It's entitled The Effect of Gastronomy, Motivation and Local Food Involvement in Food Satisfaction. Dr. Kodaş, she has problem with her internet connection. She will not able to make her presentation. So I will give to the floor to the fourth paper, our fourth academic paper, belongs to Mehmet Yavuz Çetinkaya and Professor Zafer Öter, entitled The Global COVID-19 Outbreak and Its Economic Implication on Turkish Tourist Guide. As a tourist guide, as a professional tourist guide, I also wonder the presentation. Dr. Yavuz Çetinkaya will make the presentation, and I give the floor to the Çetinkaya. Here you are. We can't hear you. Could you please open your microphone?
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Harman. So let me share my screen first, and then I will give you the presentation. So is it clear now, my presentation? Can everybody see it?
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Okay, you are welcome. Well, hello, everybody. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Mehmet Yavuz Çetinkaya. I work as a research assistant at the Department of Tourism Guidance, Faculty of Tourism, University of Pamukkale. First of all, I would like to express thank you very much for contributing our research presentation as a listener. I will make the presentation of the research which was co-authored with Professor Dr. Zafer Öter from İzmir Katip Çelebi University, and our research is titled The Global COVID-19 Outbreak and Its Economic Implications on Turkish Tour Guides. As you all know, the COVID-19 outbreak, which became one of the most stunning pandemics of the modern era, had a truly global impact on the world economy in a short period of time. Almost all countries were negatively impacted by the COVID-19 outbreak, which practically paralyzed global life and resulted in negative dynamics, unprecedented conditions, and obstacles. Turkey was not immune to this, having felt the consequences of this negativity during this period, and tourism was one of the hardest hit industries, nearly coming to a complete halt for the first time since World War II in the 21st century. The industry of tourism in Turkey, steadily growing over the previous decade, was also subjected to this difficult process, bringing the situation to a near standstill. Tour guides, who are major frontline workers in the tourism industry, underwent this negativity and faced various job-related challenges. With these considerations in mind, our research sought to uncover how the COVID-19 outbreak impacted Turkish tour guides. Well, as you all know, throughout the history, humanity has faced numerous epidemics, diseases that have caused millions of people to suffer adversely. Well, if I want to give you some examples to this: Spanish influenza, swine flu, black plague, Ebola, etc. And these epidemic diseases might be itemized as some of the deadliest outbreaks in history, resulting in terrible toll, mass deaths not only on humanity but also on the global economy by causing labor and productivity losses and ending in economic deterioration with short and long-term consequences. The recently identified COVID-19 outbreak as a form of unusual pneumonia, resulting in respiratory disorder with some specific symptoms, such as cough, fever, and difficulty in breathing. In more serious cases, was first reported on December 31, 2019 in Wuhan, a popular city of 11 million, as the most noticeably hit zone, and was declared as a pandemic by the World Health Organization on March 11, 2020. The COVID-19 outbreak was significant in world history, as I said before, the most challenging tragedy and the biggest disruption causing global paranoia due to its fatal nature since World War II. Hundreds of thousands of people died, and the mental and the physical health of billions of people deteriorated as a result of the outbreak. And according to World Health Organization, the number of the confirmed cases of the COVID-19 reached 233,503,524 people as of 1st October 2021, with 4,777,503 deaths worldwide. In Turkey, where the first case of COVID-19 outbreak was reported on March 10, 2020, and the first death recorded on March 17, just only 7 days later, there have been 7,154,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19, with a total of nearly 65,000 people deaths from January 3, 2020 to October 1, 2021. These were the figures when I lastly checked the official sites of both World Health Organization and also Turkish Ministry of Health in Turkey. Well, the COVID-19 outbreak, which expanded at an alarming rate over the world, had far-reaching consequences for the tourism industry, making it one of the worst affected industries in the world. And all people, including academics, scientists, politicians, and theologians, were busy with debating the effect of the COVID-19 outbreak on all aspects of life. Therefore, tourism scholars focused their attention on the potential impacts, antecedents, and consequences of the COVID-19 outbreak on the tourism industry. In general, particularly studies investigating the future of tourism travel around the world among them. Well, generally on the tourism industry and its ramifications for the economy, on hotel chains, on travel agencies, on consumer behaviors, religious tourism, medical tourism, domestic tourism, sport tourism, rural tourism, etc. However, when I checked the literature both in Turkey and in abroad, I couldn't find so many sources, academic papers, with only a few exceptions. If I'm not mistaken, 3 papers, academic papers in our country, which were conducted by different various scholars, and only 1 in Slovakia. So we can say that there's a limited academic research on tour guides, who are one of the most important stakeholders and indispensable components of the tourism industry, because tour guides also underwent this negativity by experiencing great job-related difficulties because of COVID-19 outbreak. So this was our starting point why we needed to make a research paper about the effects, particularly economic impacts of COVID-19 outbreak on Turkish tour guides. Well, we just did this because we just wanted to fill in this gap. That's why we just needed to make a research about this. Let me change. I will not give you more information about the literature. I will directly skip to the methodology. Well, in our research, we just aim to address the COVID-19 outbreak and its economic implications, as I told you before, Turkish tour guides. This research proceeded in two phases, namely theoretical and practical. The first phase involved conducting one comprehensive literature review on the COVID-19 outbreak and its antecedents, effects, and consequences on the tourism industry with secondary data gathered from a variety of sources. In the second phase, we utilized a semi-structured interview form with the relevant open-ended questions to obtain in-depth data and context-specific samples using both criterion sampling method and maximum variation sampling method. The interview form we just administered on 26 Turkish licensed tour guides affiliated to the Izmir Chamber of Tour Guides in September 2021. For this purpose, we electronically sent the interview form uploaded online to the possible informants meeting the sampling criteria via email, since face-to-face meetings were mostly unavailable during the pandemic process. And when we obtained all the primary data in the field, we just subjected the primary data to content analysis, which stands for a qualitative data analysis technique, providing access to the concepts and relations to explain the collected data and aiming to define the data and find out the possibly hidden truth in the data, coupled with descriptive analysis, which accounts for another qualitative data analysis technique, enabling to summarize and interpret the data gathered with different data collection methods. Well, we just asked 7 open-ended questions, and of course there were some other questions. We asked to find out the informant's social, demographic, and occupational related characteristics, at least to understand what kind of a sample we just applied in our research. As you can see, just the table showing the social demographic characteristics such as gender, marital status, age group, educational qualification, and there were 7 more questions which dealt to uncover the occupational characteristics of the informants in our research. And when we just, the findings of our research, when we come to the subject of our findings, what was the aim of our research? It was just to understand what kind of economic implications on Turkish tour guides or traces left by the COVID-19 outbreak. This was our subject. The first question was in this way. So we just asked participants to understand this, and also just the informants were also asked to compare their financial status in detail to that of pre-pandemic period from an economic standpoint. Following the content analysis, all informants nearly uttered that the COVID-19 outbreak had adverse impacts negative on them. In other words, the COVID-19 outbreak had significant economic effects on Turkish tour guides, making them feel insecure financially. Well, if we need to express more broadly, the COVID-19 outbreak rendered the measures of the participants totally unemployed, with a few exception of a small number of tour guides partially employed by travel agencies or tour operators. Furthermore, most of the informants stated that they lost at least 70% of their annual income and maybe more when it's compared with the previous year because of the financial difficulties caused by the COVID-19 outbreak's lower employment rate. Mostly tour guides in our country work on a freelance basis and they do not have regularly paid job, except only for a small number of tour guides employed by travel agencies and tour operators, so on. And also some informants stated that they were caught completely unprepared because in our country, the time of, in Turkey, the time of the precautions which were taken against COVID-19 outbreak happened to be at the beginning of March. So we just regard the March and April as the beginning of the season. That's why they stated that they were caught completely unprepared because, and also they stated that they didn't have enough savings in prior years as well. There was one more question to understand the tour guides' thoughts and their ideas about the state institutions and occupational chambers and organizations' attitudes during the period of COVID-19 outbreak. The second question was in this way. We just wanted to understand how the TUREP and also ISRO, these were the occupational chambers and organizations in Turkey, to understand what kind of a help they provided to tour guides. Following the content analysis, I should say that just most of the tour guides, informants, were not content with the approaches taken by ISRO and also TUREP, because they stated that they were not helped. So no economic help was provided to tour guides. The informant specified that there was only a bank, public bank, offered tour guides with a bank loan credit up with interest up to 10,000 Turkish liras, which most of the informants did not consider as an economic help because they were waiting for an economic help which didn't require to repayment like the one which was provided to artisans and other people in Turkey. Even some informants stated that they rejected to apply bank because it was a monetary, non-refundable assistance or a contribution, as it required them to pay back, as I told you before. And also informants shared one more common view that the level of the sport, or the so-called sport, they said, was insufficient. For some, there was no aid, and the so-called sport was limited. That's why I can say that most of the tour guides were dissatisfied with the state institutions and occupational chambers and organizations' approach during the outbreak. There was another finding which I also disappointed me as well, because tour guides are feeling that the profession of tour guiding was not taken seriously by the government, particularly, and tour guides were ignored by the government, or since they claimed to be outside of the scope of the economic support package, although their number was very limited. You know, it's in our country, the number of the licensed tour guides was nearly 12,000, something like that. And also there was one more economic help, which some informants stated it was given by the ISRO to ease the yearly payments to the occupational chamber, but there were also some other tour guides who didn't regard it as a help either. And also the informants stated that the occupational chambers and organizations were ineffective, thus they didn't play any significant role in this play. Even there was a possibility for Turkish workers, employees to, no matter regardless of the industry, to apply for short-time working allowance, but there were some criteria. That's why the informant stated that most of the tour guides couldn't apply the short-time working allowance pay since they didn't meet the criteria because their premium paid days were not enough to apply this program. And the third question we just asked to our informants to understand from their point of view what kind of suggestions they can just develop to compensate the economic losses of tour guides. So they just developed several suggestions to overcome these economic losses, as particularly they suffered and they will probably suffer from the COVID-19 outbreak. The first one, the tour guides should not be required to pay yearly contribution payments and the costs of the annual licenses. And the informant stated that these amounts should be paid by the government to occupational chambers and organizations instead during the, at least for the time of the COVID-19 outbreak. And they were expecting non-repayable economic aid should be given them as well. The government should set up an economic support fund for tourism employees, particularly for tour guides who have suffered greatly from the COVID-19 outbreak. There was one suggestion like that, maybe 30 or 40% of the annual income, which they had before the pandemic period, could be given to tour guides, at least to make them satisfied for the period of COVID-19 outbreak, because artisans and craftsmen were given the same money, the same amount of money as an economic help, and there was no repayment. They also added. And also, tour guides could apply working allowance pay, and this program should be, well, all tour guides should benefit from this program regardless of the number of the premium paid days. And TUREP and TURSAP, these two organizations, both for Turkish tour guides and Turkish travel agencies, should work together with central and local tourism authorities as well as the municipalities to organize some outdoor events in which tour guides could be employed partially for promotional activities to get some financial benefits. Also, tour guides premium debts and credit debts should be postponed to the post-pandemic period with no interest was another recommendation by the tour guides. And also some tour guides even stated that tour guides should make more savings when allowed to work freely. They could live on at least for 1 or 2 years. In addition, they should have an individual retirement program or at least make some investments on other financial instruments. Perhaps importantly, tour guides should have a second job with regular and stable payment. This was one of the sentences. They just formed, well, I understood their pessimism about the future of the tour guiding profession. And occupational chambers and organizations should establish an employment fund to help tour guides for rainy days, including wars, outbreaks, natural disasters, worrisome and driver crisis, because of the fragility of the tour guiding profession and also tourism industry as a sector. Well, and also tour guides were not content with the approaches of the occupational chambers and organizations. They think that these organizations should play a more active role when to solve tour guides' problems, because most of the tour guides think that they are not active and they don't defend the rights of tour guides as much as needed or as much as they asked. The fourth question was tour guides' concerns on COVID-19 outbreak. We just wanted to unclog tour guides' concerns on COVID-19 outbreak more widely. The informants were asked to state what type of concerns they had while leading tours, whether they got worried or not about being infected with the COVID-19 virus when at work. If yes, how they coped with these worries and what kind of precautions they took to ensure the health of the tour groups and participants as well. While following the content analysis, the informants point out that they were greatly worried of being infected with the virus on tours when they had the chance to work. They expressed that they did not have so much opportunity to work, with only a few exceptions. They rarely worked. However, when they had a possibility to work, they were worried like other people too. For these, some informants stated that they did not prefer working in package tours requiring accommodation for days. Instead, they took daily short trips in their cities. Well, informants also specified that they watched online informative videos and general instructions, especially the circular letter on COVID-19 outbreak, initiated by the Ministry of Culture and Tourism and the Turkish Union of Tourist Guides Chambers for tour guides, and they tried their best to follow these rules and regulations when they had a chance to work. I mean, like wearing masks, keeping social distance, using the cologne and disinfected ventilation of the bus, preventing overcrowding, cleaning the equipment often during the tours. Some informants stated that they made tour participants obey all the rules and instructions by making constant warnings. These were the concerns of the tour guides during the tours.
Dr. Çetinkaya, you have last 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah, I will be. I thought maybe there was no presentation. That's why I may need just a little bit extra time.
Yes.
Okay, tour guides live life during the COVID-19 outbreak. Well, I can just summarize that. We just asked these questions to tour guides to understand how informants made a living during the COVID-19 outbreak. More widely, whether they had to work part-time somewhere else or not in addition to their regular job. And they stated that they used their all previous year's savings. They faced financial hardships and they economized on many daily patterns and they cut expenses. Tour guides also worked or attempt to work to supplement income in different professions. And also some of the tour guides applied for bank loans. The family members was another source of income to make a living during the pandemic period. Well, how tour guides moralized COVID-19 pandemic lessons learned? This was another question just we addressed to participants to understand. Well, they mostly think that the reshape of tourism will take some more time and tour guiding profession experience some major changes as well. For example, smaller groups with less people under strictly taking precautions, and digital tour guiding coupled with technology and smartphone applications could be another option. The future of tour guiding profession seemed to be uncertain with its fragile structure, making tour guides disappointed. And well, a more stable and more regularly paid job when the outbreak is over was another issue. More savings for possibly rainy days and coupled with other alternative income sources. A network of social instance, solidarity such as unemployment fund, tour guides also should not work under the weights. And we think that this study contributes to a still maturing stream of the academic research on the COVID-19 outbreak, its impacts, consequences on tour guides by coming up with qualitative evidence from one country, Turkey. The study highlighted the fact that Turkish tour guides had great difficulties, having no strength left, while taking the potential of Turkey as a tourism destination, both in terms of international tourist arrivals and also international tourism receipts. Tour guides should be given great value, I think. So the necessary precautions to understand the tour guides and to protect the guiding profession should be taken as soon as possible. Well, we believe that hopefully the study findings will hopefully be helpful for tourism authorities, policymakers, travelers, etc. We will just share it with the necessary people, necessary organizations. We will make it more expanded in different areas. So I can say all about my presentation. Sorry for just exceeding the time. Well, yes, that's the end of my presentation.
Dr. Çetinkaya, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. As a tourist guide, and I work in the director board of the Şanlıurfa Chamber of Regional Tourist Guides. We really faced, I observed my friends, they had really very huge economic problems during the pandemic. And the tourism industry was the most affected industry in the world because of the outbreak of the COVID-19. Not only the economic effects, also tourist guides faced very huge psychological effects because they were the people, they were the ones to be outside, but during the pandemic, during the outbreak, most of them stayed at home. So it brought some psychological, very negative psychological effect. It's another research topic, psychological effects of the COVID-19 outbreak on tourist guides. And I will ask our participants if is there any question to Dr. Çetinkaya. If there is no question, yesterday, Dr. Henama couldn't make his presentation. I will give floor to the Henama, and I will give 10 minutes to Dr. Henama to make the presentation. Is it okay, doctor? Yes, Dr. Henama, here you are. You have the floor.
Okay. Let's make sure.
You have 10 minutes, doctor.
Thank you. My study is about, it's firstly a tourism synthesis of tourism in the global south. And the gaze is about two countries, firstly South Africa and then Nigeria. South Africa is located at the southern tip of the African continent, and it is one of the most top tourism attractions on the African continent. South Africa is primarily known as a mega event destination, and the major event that South Africa has hosted was the 2010 FIFA World Cup, which was one of the best World Cups ever held. And images that are closely associated with the 2010 World Cup include the Vuvuzela and our beautiful stadiums and the Iberians obviously winning that World Cup. South Africa, in the context of South Africa, tourism is a major economic contributor. It is one of the biggest attractor of foreign exchange. It is disproportionately important for African countries and contributes nearly 3% of GDP. Then, tourism has been incorporated into the economic development policies of the state. South Africa has got 10 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Because tourism has been growing at such a fast pace in South Africa, it is represented just like gold mining did in the late 1970s and early 1980s. One of the biggest challenges South Africa faces is high levels of unemployment, poverty, and inequality, which we regard as structural challenges that impact on the tourism industry. When the COVID-19 hit South Africa, it actually obviously led to a lot of migration of tourists, and this new variant, which has just been discovered in South Africa, is also not doing us anything to help the tourism industry. And then international borders for tourism recovery were opened very, very late in the year last year. And then domestic tourism was gazed upon as an opportunity to recover the tourism industry. But that was difficult because our economy in South Africa has not been growing. And when domestic tourism depends on the domestic economy to grow. And these are some of the images about South Africa. This is obviously the World Cup in beautiful Cape Town. Situational analysis. When we speak about South Africa, poverty, unemployment, inequality are big challenges on the economy. More than 50% unemployment rate. The economy has not grown by more than 3% for the past 15 years. There's a big skills mismatch. And all of these challenges have a negative impact on the economy of South Africa. Now, definition of religious tourism is obviously about looking at places of pilgrimage. And I think all of us here have a clear understanding of the definition. And then in South Africa, the biggest church, what we call an African initiated church, is the Zion Christian Church, the ZCC, which has got headquarters in Moriah City. This church, the vast majority of people that attend it are people of African descent, and there are three major pilgrimage times that they go. The first one is during Christmas. The second one, which is the most popular, is during the Good Friday and Easter, where more than 16 million ZCC members descend on Moriah City to come and attend. And then the last one is the one which happens in September, where it's Pula ya Ngwaga, which is basically the first rains have arrived, and then it is important for people to come and celebrate at the church. Now, if you look at this pilgrimage, you find that it is the most prominent religious tourism event in Southern Africa. And these people come from all walks of life, and the vast majority of them are coming from South Africa and neighboring countries. The difference with the ZCC celebration is that it only attracts members of the ZCC. So in other words, it does not allow for non-ZCC members to come and visit and to do tourism consumption. Yeah? And the vast majority of members of the ZCC would be typically your low-income to middle-class people, even though there might be a small element of the elite that would be members of the ZCC. So the vast majority of them, they sleep in a plethora of buses that make themselves that descend on Polokwane. And I think if you look at the pictures that I've presented and put up there, you see a plethora of buses that have descended there and a lot of cars. And this is the primary means of transportation. And also you find that a lot of people obviously use those buses to sleep. Now, as part of a conclusion and reflection on this, we say that this is the biggest collaboration of a pilgrimage in the Southern Hemisphere. But this has a positive impact on the economy of Limpopo and Polokwane generally. But this does not have a major impact on the entire tourism value chain, which includes accommodation and other stuff. But without this great pilgrimage, the city of Polokwane and Limpopo as a province would not have a financial lifeline, which this festival, which attracts 60 million people, has. And then these are some of the images of the plethora of members that come and attend. They wear different uniform, and they are a very, very, very big church in South Africa. And the second religious festival I want to gaze upon is the Rastafarian festival that happens in Judah Square. Judah Square is a is a Rastafarian enclave located in the city of Knysna, which is one of the most prominent tourism cities in South Africa. It is known for the Oyster Festival, and the Judah Festival was formed in 1992 in an informal settlement for the Rastafarian community. The festival is primarily directed at people of Rastafarian belief, and it is actually one of the most renowned and appreciated festivals on the African continent. And the event obviously begins on the 23rd of July, which involves live bands, ceremonies, and plenty of activities. It is rated as one of the 300 best festivals to attend. And this festival seeks to commemorate Rastafarian culture, way of life, music, food, and philosophy. They do allow people who are not Rastafarians to attend for as long as they abide by the rules and the do's and the don'ts of what happens here. It plays host to 10 days of ceremonies, which celebrate His Majesty Haile Selassie's birthday and Emancipation Day. And also it includes 7 days of church ceremonies. And also they do allow guides led by residents of Judah Square to obviously immerse visitors on the rich history that they have. And this is an example of a community-initiated festival. And these are some of the images that happen. And this festival, obviously, it's a niche festival for people of Rastafarian descent, but it is completely different from what the city of Knysna is known for, which is the Oyster Festival. And then the last religious thing I'm going to do is speak about the Synagogue Church of All Nations, which is located in Nigeria. The leading pastor, the TB Joshua, unfortunately passed this year and left us. This church was very, very popular. Out of each and every 10 tourists that arrive in Nigeria, 8 of them would be going to the Squan. 40,000 people were visiting the Squan each and every year and became an important brand for Nigeria's tourism. Now, what you find is that South Africans are a big consumer of Pentecostalism, and a lot of them would visit the Squan Church in Nigeria. And the typical cost for each and every person going to visit the Squan from South Africa would obviously cost around about 24,000 rands. And these are some of the images that come from the Squan. And these last images obviously indicate when TB Joshua was lying in state. And the conclusions is that religious tourism is one of the most stable forms of special interest tourism. It has the potential to lead to tourism recovery if you find that the private sector works with players within the religious tourism industry to recover the tourism industry. Revenge tourism, when we speak about revenge tourism, we speak about people that have been at home and they have a desire that all my plans for the past 2 years have been put on hold because of COVID. Now is the opportunity in a lifetime to travel. So we believe that revenge tourism will obviously lead to more tourism recovery as people seek to once again live their lives to normality. And one of the issues, as we reflect as part of the conclusions, the ZCC, which is the biggest African initiated church in the Southern Hemisphere, will continue to grow tourism arrivals once big pilgrimages are once again allowed. But because of the new variant in South Africa, we do not know. And secondly, in Judah Square, the liberalization and legalization of cannabis for private use has a potential to once again lead to more people having interest to attend this Rastafarian festival, because there is a big demand for the consumption of cannabis and cannabis-related products. And then for the Squan, we think that the death of TB Joshua will have a negative impact on religious tourism to Nigeria, but there are other Pentecostal priests, such as Pastor Chris, which might be an opportunity for them to benefit from the demise of TB Joshua and also to recover religious tourism in Nigeria. Thank you.
Dr. Hanema, thank you very much. In his presentation, Dr. Hanema explained us 3 cases of religious tourism in South Africa. Thank you very much for his presentation. But in the chat section, I see Dr. Olsen, Daniel Olsen, ask the question, especially that Zion Christian Church in South Africa, during the pilgrimage, we see it was very crowded, and there should be environmental concern. What do you think about this, Dr. Hanema?
I think it's first and foremost, when people, because remember, the vast majority, Limpopo is the most northernest province in South Africa. And a lot of people who come from Gauteng, Pretoria, Johannesburg going up. So first and foremost, you find that there are so many buses on the road that a trip which would run about, a trip which is supposed to be 4 hours can be up to 8 hours. So unfortunately, from an environmental perspective, it is doing very bad because of greenhouse emissions. And because South Africa has got a poor non-road public transport system, such as rail, if we had an efficient rail system, a lot of these people would be using rail. But unfortunately, South Africa has got a very poor transport system, and you find people have to be in those buses. And unfortunately, it is the local municipality that is given the responsibility to clean all that mess that is left after the 16 million people have left after especially the Good Friday period.
Yes, so the environmental effects also should be considered. If there is no other question, as a chair of the session, I'm going to close the session and invite all our viewers to the keynote speech of Dr. Dylan Timothy 5 minutes later. Thank you very much, and greetings from Upper Mesopotamia to all.